You're no longer needed here. That's all she said. No explanation. No thank you, just those 5 words, sharp, final, and utterly humiliating. I stood there, heart pounding, in a glass-walled office I had practically built with my 2 hands. The woman who said it, Tessa Grant. 27. Fresh MBA. High heels, sharper tongue. She didn't even look up from her laptop. My name is Evelyn Burke. I'm 48. And until that morning, I was the operations director at Norcrest Systems, one of Atlanta's most significant industrial firms. I'd worked there for 22 years, trained teams, built systems, solved crises they'll never know they narrowly avoided. But none of that mattered anymore. Not to her. She called it streamlining. She said she wanted a fresh, modern direction. Translation: clear out anyone over 40 with opinions and history. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just nodded once, turned around, and walked out. As I passed the bullpen, people I'd mentored looked away. The silence was louder than any goodbye. But here's the part Tessa didn't know, the part that changed everything. This story will make you angry and cheer, and I promise, the ending. You won't see it coming. Before entering the details, grab a cup of tea, turn up the volume, and don't forget to comment. Please tell us where in the world you are and what time it is in your local area. We want to know how far these stories go. I sat in my car for a long time that morning, the cardboard box of my belongings beside me like some strange monument to 2 decades of loyalty. The parking lot was almost empty. Just me, the wind, and the echo of Tessa's words. You're no longer needed here. But something inside me refused to believe that was the end. I'm not the dramatic type. I don't slam doors or burn bridges, I think. I plan. And I remember things people forget, like contracts. Back home, I dug through my filing cabinet, the old metal one I've had since before my kids were born. The second drawer and middle folder hold my original Norcrest employment contract signed by Raymond Grant, Tessa's father. I flipped through it, slowly tracing the pages with my fingers, until I found Section 14, subsection C. In the event of termination without documented cause, the employee is entitled to severance compensation, equal to 24 months of their current salary, plus retention of Class B profit-sharing shares, unless otherwise waived in writing. It was still there. It's clear as day. And untouched. Tessa hadn't read it. Or worse, she had and thought I wouldn't. That's when I called Marta Nguyen. We'd met at a nonprofit board years ago. She's the kind of lawyer who doesn't blink, doesn't chatter. Just listen, process, then act. I read her the clause. There was a short pause on the line, then she said, "Well, they just made a costly mistake." Still, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the money. Something about how I was dismissed like a relic brushed off a shelf stirred something deeper. This wasn't just a job. It was a part of me. And if they thought they could rewrite my worth with a wave of a hand and a jargon-filled memo, they were wrong. I started pulling names from memory, people like me, people who might have been cut for the same reasons. Henry from finance, Lillian from logistics, and Jerome, head of compliance, all veterans, all with ironclad contracts written back when the company still valued experience. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. How many others would she have ignored if Tessa had missed my clause? How many lives had been disrupted under the guise of streamlining, and who was going to hold her accountable? One paragraph might have been overlooked, but it was going to rewrite the entire story. And I wasn't going to be the only one turning the page. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow notepad, a fresh cup of coffee, and a long list of names. The warm and soft sunlight streamed through the window, but I couldn't feel it. My mind was already moving. I started with Henry Caldwell. We'd worked side by side during the merger project back in 2011. I remembered his son had just started college. When he picked up the phone, his voice sounded flat, like someone awake all night. "You too?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Tessa's cleanup crew. She said they were cutting redundancy. I guess 20 years of experience counts as that now." I didn't laugh. Neither did he. Next was Lillian Torres. Logistics. Heart of steel. She rerouted an entire shipment line in 3 hours during a winter storm. Her voice cracked when she heard mine. I didn't even get a meeting, she whispered. Just a memo and a security escort. Then Jerome. Then Barry. Then Denise. Every call was a variation of the same story. Quiet firings, vague reasons, a younger replacement already lined up. Some were angry and numb, but all felt the same bitter truth: they weren't being let go for lack of performance. They were being erased. I told them what I found in my contract and asked them to check theirs. Most hadn't looked at it in years, and some had never read the fine print. But a few started flipping pages while we were still on the call. Clause 9C, Lillian said. Termination without cause. 2 years' salary. My God, Evelyn. They didn't just push us out, I said. They did it without following the rules. Henry exhaled sharply. So what now? Now, I said. We check every contract. We talk to Marta. And we don't let this disappear quietly. As the morning turned into afternoon, I made 15 calls. Each ended the same way, with a heavy silence and then a spark of something more substantial resolve. These people weren't just my coworkers. They were the backbone of Norcrest. And suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everyone to be dismissed like they didn't matter. We weren't a threat to the future. We were the reason the company had one at all. And if Tessa thought we'd disappear into early retirement and broken pride, she was about to learn what loyalty looks like when it has nothing left to lose. By the third day, my phone was a maze of texts, voicemails and email forwards contracts, highlighted in yellow disbelief, turning into determination. But one message stood out. It was short and simple, just 5 words. Still thinking about our chat. It was from Paul Drexler. Paul owned a mid-sized fabrication company across town, mainly serving niche clients custom parts and short-run orders. We'd met years ago at a trade expo. He'd always admired Norcrest's capacity, but scoffed at how slowly we adapted. More than once, he'd floated the idea of me jumping ship to help him build something leaner, faster, smarter. I never took him seriously until now. We met at a diner on the west side with vinyl booths and chipped mugs that never empty. Paul looked like he always did. Flannel shirt, weathered hands, the type of guy who understood balance sheets and torque ratings. I heard about Tessa, he said, sliding a menu aside. Saw it coming. The board handed her the keys and shut their eyes. She's not just fumbling, I said. She's gutting the place. People with decades of knowledge gone in a week. Paul leaned back. So let's build something smarter. I blinked. You mean it? He nodded. I've got the space, a few reliable clients. I don't have someone who knows how to build systems from scratch, someone people would follow. You bring the team. I'll back the rest. It wasn't just about spite. It was about filling a hole Tessa didn't even see. Norcrest had abandoned its most profitable niche custom industrial assemblies. There is too much focus on volume and too little precision. You're talking about competing head-to-head, I said. No, he smiled. I'm talking about offering what they've forgotten how to do. The words landed. This wasn't about revenge. This was about building something meaningful that respected the people who did the work. By the time I left the diner, we'd mapped out a skeleton plan, a small facility, specialized output, modular teams, and something Tessa could never replicate: a culture rooted in experience and trust. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: momentum. This wasn't just going to be about fighting back. It was about stepping forward with the right people in the right way. And maybe, just maybe, proving that getting older doesn't mean getting left behind. It means you've finally seen enough to know exactly where to go next. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in the middle of an empty warehouse on the south edge of town, dust swirling through shafts of afternoon light. The place used to be a long-abandoned packaging plant, but the bones were good steel beams, high ceilings, enough space for both machinery and momentum. It was exactly what we needed: a blank slate. Paul had already signed the lease. He moved fast, always had. But now the real work began: turning an idea into an actual operation. There was no name yet, no logo, just sketches, spreadsheets, and shared belief. I started calling the team. Henry signed on without hesitation. Lillian brought 2 of her best supervisors. Jerome said he'd join once his non-compete expired in spirit if not in title. And then came someone unexpected, Amira, a 30-something project manager I'd mentored years ago. Sharp, driven, and disillusioned by Norcrest's new direction. "I want in," she said. "But only if it's not just a nostalgia act." It was a fair point. We couldn't just rebuild the old days. We had to design something better and smarter. And that meant blending experience with innovation, not just hiring who we missed, but who we needed. We spent nights around folding tables, drafting workflows on whiteboards, debating software platforms, and discussing everything from safety protocols to hiring principles. Paul called it garage-level energy, with grown-up strategy. I called it home. We decided on a modular production model, small batches, high customization, with teams empowered to own each project from start to finish. There would be no micromanagement, no silos, and everyone would know what they were building, why it mattered, and who it was for. One night, as we argued over whether to lease or buy a specific CNC unit, Amira said something that stopped me cold. "You're building more than a company," she said. "You're building a second chance. For all of us." She was right. This wasn't about taking back what we lost. It was about proving what we were still capable of. But we weren't naive. We knew starting from zero meant risk. Money would be tight. Timelines would slip. And somewhere out there, Tessa was still sitting in a glass office, likely unaware of what was forming beneath her radar. She didn't realize that when you remove someone's position, you don't erase their purpose. You reveal it. And ours was just beginning to take shape, blueprint by blueprint, voice by voice, brick by brick. About a month into the rebuild, my phone buzzed with a text that read, "Can we meet? Not at work." Not on the record. It was from Karen Lee. Karen had been Norcrest's head of quality control for almost as long as I'd been in operations. Detail-obsessed, sharp as a tack, and fiercely loyal to the standards we built together. She was one of the few who hadn't been let go too close to retirement, too expensive to push without a fight. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes, where the coffee's too strong and no one asks questions. She wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy. Her hands fidgeted around a mug she never drank from. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice low. "But you deserve to know what's happening." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies, internal memos, redacted QA reports, and flagged incident logs. Orders were being rushed, tolerances ignored, and overseas parts approved without complete testing. 3 clients, big ones, had already threatened to pull contracts. Tessa's been liquidating assets, Karen said. Machines we invested in last year gone. She's calling it strategic realignment. But it looks like cash conversion. Is she in trouble? Karen shook her head. Not yet. But it's coming. My heart sank. Not because I wanted Norcrest to fail. I didn't. I still had friends there, people who needed that job to put kids through school or care for aging parents. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. But facts are facts. You can't get infrastructure and expect stability. You can't dismiss legacy and expect loyalty. And you sure can't silence experience without consequences. She's watching vendors closely, Karen added. She knows you're starting something. Said no one who works with you will work with Norcrest. I leaned back and let that sink in. So that's how it was going to be. She's betting you'll fade, Karen whispered. I'm betting she's wrong. I smiled, not because I felt victorious, but because I knew what we were building was real, and real things have gravity. Before we left, Karen put a hand on my arm. You didn't hear it from me. Of course not, I said. This was just 2 old friends catching up. But as I drove away, her words echoed louder than any memo. Tessa was pulling levers, but she didn't understand. And one of them was about to snap. By summer, our new space had walls-up machines ordered and a handful of client leads and early conversations. But momentum alone wouldn't shield us from what came next. Because Tessa, she finally noticed. It started with a thinly veiled cease and desist letter, full of legal fluff accusing me of breaching confidentiality, recruiting Norcrest employees, and threatening corporate continuity. Marta called it laughable. "She's throwing darts in the dark," she said, sipping green tea with a calmness I envied. But it's time we turned on the lights. We didn't just push back. We filed our case. The filing included not just my contract, but those of 7 others, each one with similar protections, and violated in the same careless sweep. Marta laid it out cleanly: wrongful termination, breach of contract, and pattern of age-based discrimination. It wasn't about drama. It was about documents. The first mediation meeting was held in a downtown office with windows too high to look out of. Tessa arrived in a beige suit, phone in hand, flanked by a young attorney who looked like he still used flashcards. She didn't look at me. They didn't greet anyone. Marta began. "We're seeking the full severance outlined in the contracts. Nothing more, nothing less." Tessa scoffed. They were let go because they couldn't adapt. That's not discrimination, that's evolution. The attorney beside her flipped through the contracts. His face paled about halfway down page 3. "Where's the documentation?" Marta asked. "Where's the performance review, the improvement plan, the written warnings?" There was nothing. Just assumptions. Just arrogance. 6 months, Tessa snapped. "We'll offer half a year severance. Final." "No," Marta said, "you'll offer what's owed, and if this goes to court, we'll add punitive damages. We'll subpoena internal memos. We'll show the pattern." The room went silent. Then Tessa leaned forward, eyes hard. "You're overplaying your hand, Evelyn. No one will work with you after this." I didn't flinch. "That's fine. I'm not building for everyone, just for the ones who still believe in work that matters." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and left without shaking hands. But her lawyer stayed behind for a moment longer. "We'll talk," he said quietly, eyes not quite meeting mine. The law wasn't personal, but the consequences. They were starting to get real. For the first time, I felt the tide turning, not because we made noise, but because we brought the one thing her whole strategy lacked: proof. Just a few weeks after the mediation, the ripples started showing. Karen texted first a photo of an internal memo with red ink scrawled across it. "Client No. 203 threatening to pull the contract. Delay unacceptable." Then came the news of 2 key engineers resigning within days of each other. And by the end of the week, word spread that Norcrest had lost one of its legacy accounts to an out-of-state competitor. The one thing I knew: Tessa underestimated consequences don't always knock. Sometimes they seep quietly, and the foundation's already cracked when you notice. Paul and I were reviewing supplier bids when I received a call from Charles Henley, Norcrest's longtime chairman. His voice was unusually quiet and deliberate. "We'd like to talk," he said, off the record. 2 days later, I met him and 2 other board members in a private room in a country club. There were no name tags or assistants, just coffee files and regret. "Evelyn," Charles said, folding his hands. "We miscalculated." I didn't say anything, just waited. "She's been liquidating capital assets, selling machinery at a loss, slashing QA to hit profit goals. The company's bleeding and the board's divided. You're the board," I replied. He nodded. "But we gave her day-to-day control. Now we're reconsidering." That's when they floated the idea: some arrangement. Buyback, leadership restructure, even merger. They didn't say it out loud, but I saw it in their eyes. They weren't just asking me to help. They were asking me to save them. I thought about it long after the meeting. About the people still there, the work we built, and the pride we used to share. And I thought about Tessa, her ambition blindness, and the hollow shell she'd turned Norcrest into. She didn't break the company in a single blow. She dismantled it piece by piece. Because when you build with ego instead of ethics, it doesn't take much to make it fall. That night I stood in our facility, our name freshly painted on the wall, our crew finishing the day's batch with quiet rhythm. I didn't know if we were ready to merge, to absorb that mess. But I knew what we were building here was real. And maybe it was time to remind the industry what real leadership looked like, starting with those who forgot how fragile their castles really were. The board moved quickly after our conversation. Within 2 weeks, we were sitting in Norcrest's conference room again. But this time, I wasn't on the outside. This time, I was at the table. The room looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the tension. Perhaps the 6 board members packed shoulder to shoulder, trying not to look at one person, Tessa. She was already speaking before I even sat down. "This is absurd," she said, arms crossed, voice sharp. "We don't need a merger. We need time." Charles cleared his throat. "You've had time." She turned to me. "This is personal. You're doing this to humiliate me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Tessa, this isn't personal. It's business. You lost major clients, cut the heart out of quality control, and your leadership has pushed this company to the edge." Her lawyer tried to interrupt, but Charles stopped him. "The board has voted," he said. "We're proceeding with the acquisition. Evelyn will oversee operations, and Norcrest will become a division under her leadership. Effective immediately." Tessa's face drained of color. "You can't. I own 20%. "And I still hold controlling shares," Charles replied, "and I'm using them for the company's good." The paperwork was signed before the hour ended. Merger-approved terms sealed. Control transferred. As we stood to leave, Tessa stepped in front of me. "You may have won this round," she said, low and bitter, "but I'll make sure everyone knows what you are." I met her eyes. Make sure they know I built something that works. She walked out, heels clicking faster than her breath. And that was the last time I saw her in that building. Back at our office, Paul was waiting with a quiet grin. "She takes it well," I shook my head. "Like a thunderstorm in a glass jar." We walked the new floor plan together, with designers sketching custom orders and QA teams running complete diagnostics. The Norcrest legacy was now part of us. We would ensure it didn't get lost again. It wasn't about taking over. It was about putting things back where they belonged. For everyone who stayed. For everyone who left. And for everyone who'd been told they weren't needed only to prove they were the reason it worked in the first place. A year after the merger, the floor at our new facility moved like clockwork. Not with cold precision, but with rhythm. The kind that comes when people know why they're doing what they do. Teams collaborated without hierarchy, just respect. Names on uniforms didn't matter as much as the hands doing the work. We'd kept the best of Norcrest, their custom systems legacy clients, and a handful of employees who hadn't given up hope. And we built from there, adding new equipment, fresh hires, and a culture that didn't ask how old you were, only what you could contribute. I stood at the mezzanine one afternoon watching the line assemble a custom rig for a new agricultural partner. Lillian passed beneath, clipboard in hand. Henry waved from logistics, and in the QA room, Karen was training a younger analyst on her methods. The past and the future, shoulder to shoulder. Paul walked up beside me. "It's different now," he said, "but in the best way." He was right. It wasn't just about the machines or the metrics. It was about rebuilding trust in leadership, fairness, and each other. And maybe in ourselves. I still thought about that day in Tessa's office sometimes, the sting of it. There was silence as I left, and how easily everything I'd built seemed to vanish in one sentence. But standing here now, surrounded by what had risen from that fall, I saw it. Some things grow stronger after they're broken, not despite the cracks, but because of them. They let the light in. They remind you what matters. And if you're willing to rebuild, not just react, you don't just get back what was lost. You build something better. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Amira, new client walkthrough tomorrow, wants to meet the founder. I smiled, tucked the phone away, and looked at the floor. There were no plaques or speeches. It was just good work by good people. This wasn't the ending I'd planned. It was better. And if you've ever been told your time has passed or your voice doesn't matter, remember this: the right moment doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes you have to build it. Before you go grab a cup of tea, turn up the volume and tell us, where in the world are you and what time is it where you're watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this one moved, you subscribe, because more stories like this are just starting.